But I think the weirdest thing in the license was like when I was applying a new one just last year, I had to renew it again. And they asked all these questions like home address, which I don't know why does it have to do with driving. And lots of things. Oh, hair color, weight. And then they asked this. They asked, do you want to fly with this driver's license? And I was like, I can give it a go. Yeah, I have never tried flying a plane. I thought you need lessons or something, but if it's just checking a box, I'm fucking doing it. I'm gonna fly.
Good morning. It's Thursday, Delta Force Thursday, November the 16th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Song of the Day, we will have Operation Praying Mantis, Israel, Varney and Company, My Take, Summit, and Maria Bartiromo, and the latest chapter in Inside Delta Force. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, Operation Praying Mantis.
The USS Samuel B. Roberts, an Oliver Hazard Perry-class guided missile frigate, is sailing through the central Persian Gulf. This is a dangerous time to be transiting the Gulf. The Iran-Iraq war is about to enter its 7th year, and both sides have grown desperate to end the conflict. The Iranian and Iraqi militaries have started to bomb shipping commerce in the Persian Gulf to cut off the other's war economy, in a conflict that had become known as the Tanker War. As part of Operation Earnest Will, the Samuel B. Roberts and other U.S. Navy warships from the 7th Fleet are dispatched to the Middle East to escort tankers safely to their destinations. The frigate is transiting the Persian Gulf when lookouts spot objects floating in the water. They initially believe these to be dolphins, but a closer examination instead reveals magnetic mines. Commander Paul Rinn is alerted and orders the Roberts to slowly reverse out of the minefield at minimum speed. After 10 minutes of backing up, the ship's luck runs out. A magnetic mine detonates directly underneath the Roberts' keel, nearly breaking the ship's back. Water gushes through a 15-foot hole, while a fire breaks out deep inside the frigate. The crew works tirelessly throughout the night and manages to save the ship. Miraculously, there are no fatalities and only 10 men have been wounded in the explosion. The frigate limps into Dubai for repairs. The following day, Navy EOD divers recover mines in the area and trace their serial numbers to Iran. The United States has previously caught Iranian ships laying mines in the Persian Gulf and warned Ayatollah Khomeini's government that any further attempts to disrupt shipping will result in military action. For US President Ronald Reagan, the mining of the Samuel B. Roberts in international waters is the final straw. The president authorizes a retaliatory strike against the Iranian military, Operation Praying Mantis. Praying Mantis is intended as a proportionate strike to cripple the Iranians' ability to fight the tanker war. 3 Surface Action Groups, or SAGs, from the US 7th Fleet, each comprising an amphibious assault ship and 2 escorts, are formed for the operation and assigned different tasks. SAG Bravo is to assault and destroy the Sasan and Rakesh oil platforms, which are being used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as military bases. SAG Charlie is to attack the Siri platform, while SAG Delta will concentrate on sinking an Iranian warship in retaliation for the mining of the Samuel Roberts. Battle Group Foxtrot is composed of the aircraft carrier Enterprise, along with its escorting ships, and will remain outside the Persian Gulf to provide air support. A key objective of the operation is to sink one of the 2 modern Sam-class frigates in the Iranian Navy, the Sahand and the Sabalan. These warships have been wreaking havoc on shipping in the Persian Gulf, often attacking neutral ships after they have already surrendered. Both frigates are considered priority targets for any naval forces in the area. At 7 a.m. on April the 18th, carrier USS Enterprise launches A-6 Intruder aircraft and F-14 Tomcat fighters. Their mission will be to search out the Iranian vessels. A backup strike group of A-7 Corsair attack aircraft will remain on deck alert and launch should more targets be detected. A Navy Hawkeye AWACS aircraft is also standing by. At the same time, SAG Bravo arrives at the Sasan oil platform, which also serves as a surveillance outpost for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. SAG Bravo is comprised of 2 destroyers, the USS Merrill and the USS Lynd McCormick, in addition to the amphibious transport USS Trenton. Captain James Perkins on board the Merrill orders a warning to be sent to the platform. A native Iranian speaker transmits the message in Farsi. "Attention Sasan platform, this is US warship. This is your warning. You have 5 minutes to clear the platform before we commence fire." Immediately after the warning is transmitted, Iranians are spotted hurriedly boarding 2 small tugs tied to the platform. After a few minutes, the tugs race away from the facility. As a show of good faith, Captain Perkins extends the deadline to 20 minutes for the remaining Iranians to evacuate. At 8:08 a.m., the platform is informed that its time is up, and the American destroyers open fire with their 5-inch guns. The first shells are deliberately set to airburst away from the target to encourage any remaining Iranians to hurry up and leave. Instead, ZSU 23mm guns on the platform open fire on the American warships. The rounds fall short, and Merrill quickly fires a salvo which destroys the gun. Following this initial barrage, a ceasefire is requested, and the rest of the Revolutionary Guard personnel gathers on the platform. One of the tugs returns to the now smoking installation to take them off. Once the last Iranians are evacuated, the Merrill and Lynd McCormick bombard the platform for another 40 minutes. At 9 a.m., 2 Cobra gunships arrive to join the fray, firing TOW anti-tank missiles at the barracks and raking the area with 20mm cannon fire. To ensure the complete destruction of the facility, a Marine assault force from the USS Trenton is briefly inserted from UH-1 helicopters onto the platform to plant explosive charges. At 1:10 p.m., the Sasan platform explodes with a deafening roar, while Marines and sailors cheer. SAG Charlie had arrived at the Siri platform at the same time as Bravo, and has transmitted a similar warning to the Iranian installation. Here, the plan is for Navy SEALs to storm the facility after the defenses are neutralized. Once again, the Iranian occupants are granted more time to evacuate before the American warships open fire. 25 minutes after their arrival, the platform's tug pulls away and the initial bombardment begins. The destroyers USS Bagley and Wainwright fire 76mm and 5-inch shells at the Siri platform. Much like at the Sasan facility, the remaining Revolutionary Guards return fire with 20mm anti-aircraft guns, but their rounds fall well short. Cobra gunships are sent in to clear the way for the SEALs, who are standing by on their transport helicopter. However, the Iranian ZSUs are still able to fire back at the Cobras as they start their gun runs, forcing them to fall back. In response, the Siri platform is pounded by naval gunfire, which sets the installation ablaze. The intense heat causes secondary explosions which rip the facility apart. The commander of SAG Charlie calls off the ground assault, leaving the keyed-up SEALs frustrated. Meanwhile, a dangerous situation is developing near SAG Bravo, as it moves north to destroy the Rakesh oil platform. A surface contact has been identified on radar, approaching the group at 25 knots. Captain Perkins orders general quarters. The destroyers prepare to open fire with Standard and Harpoon anti-ship missiles as Captain Perkins requests a visual on the target. He wants to be absolutely certain this is an enemy contact before attacking. A Navy Seahawk helicopter is dispatched and radios back that the target is indeed a warship. However, it is not one of the Iranian frigates, but instead a destroyer of the Soviet Navy. When Captain Perkins asks his Russian counterpart of his intentions, the Soviet captain replies in heavily accented English that, "I want to take pictures for history." Perkins stands down his anti-ship missile attack somewhat hastily. After the destruction of the Sasan and Siri platforms, the Iranian Navy sorties in force to counterattack the Americans. By 11 a.m., Revolutionary Guard gunboats and missile boats are assaulting any ship they can find, including the US-flagged civilian supply ship Willie Tide. The ship requests immediate support, and the Enterprise's loitering A6 intruders are sent to aid the ship. The A6's commander, Lieutenant Commander Jim Engler, finds the Boghammer high-speed patrol boats that have peeled off from the Willie Tide and are now attacking an American oil platform. Engler radios the Hawkeye, "Please confirm cleared to engage the Boghammers." His request is passed all the way to President Reagan, who approves the strike. Engler and his wingman dive on the boats while the F-14 Tomcats hold position above the clouds to provide air cover. The Boghammers are fast-moving and difficult targets. They fire back at the attacking aircraft as Engler and his wingman release their munitions, but the Rockeye cluster bombs only slightly damage one vessel, which turns for home. Disappointed by the result, Engler orders another bombing run on the other two Boghammers. The American aircraft consider switching to their laser-guided munitions, but the speedboats are moving so fast that they decide against it. Engler leads the second bombing run and drops 2 pods of cluster bombs, but again misses. However, his wingman correctly anticipates the path of one of the Boghammers and scores several direct hits. The Iranian craft stops dead in the water and starts sinking while the intruders report back of their success. At noon, SAG Charlie picks up a potential hostile contact on radar. A Seahawk helicopter from the USS Bagley is dispatched and identifies the contact as the Joshan, a French-built missile boat that was inducted into the Iranian Navy after the 1979 revolution. Captain Chandler has no intention of attacking the vessel, but his task force must sail towards the Iranian ship to intercept more Boghammers. Captain Chandler warns the missile craft to leave the area, or it will be fired upon. The Joshan acknowledges the warning, but keeps approaching the American ships in an aggressive manner. Captain Chandler issues another warning, to which the Iranian captain responds, "I'm carrying out my mission," and ceases radio communication. A final warning is transmitted to the Joshan at 12:13 p.m. "Stop, abandon ship, I intend to sink you." The Iranian missile craft responds by locking its fire control radar on the USS Wainwright. Captain Chandler orders his task force to attack the Iranian ship. The guided missile frigate USS Simpson fires 4 standard missiles while the Wainwright fires 1. As the missiles streak into the air, the Wainwright's fire control center reports "Vampire inbound." An orbiting Seahawk confirms that the Joshan has fired a Harpoon anti-ship missile at the Wainwright. With both Iranian and US missiles in the air, the American warships fire off chaff rockets and activate their jamming equipment to draw away the Harpoon missile. The opposing missiles pass by each other. The Iranian ship has no defense against fast-moving American missiles. All 5 impact the Joshan head-on, and the Iranian missile ship comes to a halt. Meanwhile, the chaff rockets have successfully diverted the Harpoon, which screams past the American ships and explodes harmlessly in the water. The USS Bagley fires its own Harpoon anti-ship missile, while closing the distance to the Iranian vessel with the Wainwright. The Harpoon misses the Joshan, but the enemy vessel is now dead in the water anyway from the earlier missile hits. As the American ships move in to finish off the ship, Captain Chandler is alerted to 3 Iranian F-4 Phantoms, which have been picked up by the Hawkeye AWACS. As the Phantoms close to just 30 miles, Chandler decides to drive them away. At 12:50 p.m., the Wainwright fires 2 SM-2 standard anti-aircraft missiles. They streak across the sky and hit their targets at the same time. One of the F-4s explodes in mid-air, while the other is damaged and forced to limp back to Iranian airspace. With the hostile aircraft dealt with, SAG Charlie turns its attention back to the wounded Joshan. The Wainwright, Simpson and Bagley finish it off with gunfire before they are ordered to disengage. At this time, SAG Bravo has been ordered to cancel its assault on the Rakesh oil platform. American Middle East Command is growing uneasy at the expanding scope of the operation and instead seek to de-escalate the situation. Yet, at 1 p.m., the guided missile destroyer USS Joseph Strauss of SAG Delta detects the radar of an Iranian SAM-class frigate, the target that the Americans have been waiting for. However, there is hesitation on whether to go after the vessel. The US Navy has already sunk an enemy warship and there is no visual contact. Admiral Less orders the target to be identified first before any attack is planned. The reserve A-7 Corsair aircraft aboard the Enterprise are launched and ordered to stand by for any enemy contact. At 2:40 p.m., one of the earlier launched A-6s, piloted by Deputy Carrier Air Group Commander Bud Langston, is searching for the target. Flying at 15,000 feet, Langston spots something below and dives through the clouds to just 50 feet above the waters of the Straits of Hormuz for a closer look. He approaches the stern of the vessel on the port side. As he draws near, anti-aircraft guns aboard the ship open fire on his intruder, but Langston is flying so low that the gunners cannot depress their barrels enough to hit him. The A-6 buzzes the ship, and Langston confirms that he has found the Iranian frigate Sahand. Several SA-2 SAMs chase after the intruder but miss. SA-2 SAMs chase after the intruder but miss. The surface ships of SAG Delta have been tasked with destroying the Iranian frigates, but the rules of engagement of Enterprise's strike aircraft authorize them to take defensive measures if they are fired upon. Langston decides to attack the Sahand and transmits a warning over the Revolutionary Guards channel, informing the frigate, "I'm going to sink you in 5 minutes." With no response, Langston lines up a shot with his intruder's harpoon, but the missile fails to fire. He swings around while his bombardier works through the weapon release checklist. On the second run, the harpoon drops free and ignites, accelerating towards the target. The Enterprise's flight controller checks in with Langston, to which the A-6 pilot responds that he has found the Sahand. The controller asks, "What are your intentions?" Langston replies, "Well, he shot at me. I'm now 12 miles out and I just launched a harpoon missile. I'm waiting for it to hit." A few seconds later, the harpoon explodes amidships and the Sahand stops dead in the water. Langston bears down on the burning ship and drops a 500-pound laser-guided bomb, which is also a direct hit. He transmits the Sahand's coordinates to another strike aircraft as he swings around for one final run with his two 1,000-pound laser-guided skipper bombs. The intruder lines up the shot before the bombardier releases both skippers right above the ship. One fails to track and misses, while the other makes a direct hit on the bridge. Satisfied, Langston reports that the Sahand is sinking and turns back to base. By this time, the ships of SAG Delta are now in the area with the arriving A-7 Corsairs overhead. The USS Joseph Strauss launches another harpoon at the Sahand, while the other A-6 and the A-7s take turns bombing the burning hulk. A combination of skippers, walleye television-guided bombs and rockeye cluster bombs further devastate the pride of the Iranian Navy. In the late afternoon, the fires aboard the Sahand finally reach her magazine, and the ship disappears in a violent explosion. At the same time, the Joseph Strauss detects another SAM-class frigate, and vectors Commander Engler to the target. The A-6 has air-to-air refueled since Engler's earlier attack on the Iranian boghammers, and still has a 500-pound bomb and rockeyes aboard. Engler spots the other modern Iranian frigate, the Sabalan. The warship fires SAMs at the American aircraft, which miss, and Engler begins his attack. The A-6 climbs to 17,500 feet, and then dives on the Sabalan at a 35-degree angle. The anti-aircraft fire is much more intense than it was from the Sahand, but Engler presses on. He releases his bomb and pulls out of his dive while the bombardier guides the munition on target. It hits the Iranian frigate and detonates directly in the engine room. Engler circles for another run to drop cluster bombs on the burning vessel, but decides against it due to the heavy anti-aircraft fire. More A-6s with their F-14 fighter escorts arrive on station before they are called off. Defense Secretary Frank Carlucci and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral William Crowe have decided to end offensive operations for the day. Crowe tells Admiral Less that "We've shed enough blood today," and the wounded Sabalan is allowed to be towed back to port. In response to the American strikes, the Iranians launched Silkworm anti-ship missile attacks against South Delta the evening of April the 18th, but no US ships are damaged. These events mark the culmination of the tanker war, and major hostilities in the Persian Gulf come to an end after the show of force from the United States.
And that was, let's see what it's called here, Operation Praying Mantis from 1988. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, inside Delta Force.
It was the perfect spot for what we were doing. We could use the huge, triangular-shaped airfield with its 6,000-foot runways and adjacent taxiways as our skid pan and racetrack. And because it was tucked away in such a remote location, we could train to our heart's content in peace and security. Donald Michael Feeney was our chief instructor. Donnie is an Irish-Italian street kid from Brooklyn who, at the urging of a New York juvenile court judge, had found a home in the Army. We had just missed each other in the Ranger Battalion. He was signing out the day I arrived, but we knew each other by reputation and through mutual friends. When I arrived for selection, Donnie was one of the cadre members, and when we started OTC, he was one of the instructors. Donnie's demeanor has been described as a terrier looking for a leg to piss on. He's as tough as a railroad spike, with alert, flashing brown eyes and a keen intelligence. I believe he's one of the most courageous men I've ever known. You can have no better friend than Don Feeney, and no more relentless an enemy. Even though he and I came from such utterly different backgrounds, and in some ways are about as opposite as two human beings can possibly be, Donnie and I share a friendship tantamount to brotherhood. I think the highest compliment I've ever received was when Donnie told someone a few years ago, "I trust Eric Haney with the lives of my children." I feel the same way about Don. Out here on the skid pan, Donnie was in his element. Fast cars and few rules. Don's assistant instructor was Bill Oswalt, the cadre member who had issued my equipment when I reported in at Camp Aberdeen. Bill's part Cherokee and hails from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was a partisan of the Okinawa Mafia, having served there with 1st Special Forces Group in the same company as Walt Shoemate and several other current members of Delta. Neither of us knew it then, but when we formed B Squadron, Bill and I would be teammates for years and comrades forever. Bill is a compactly built, handsome man with eyes so dark you can't see the pupils. He has a wild sense of humor and is most definitely alive and kicking today. He, Donnie, and I are still thick as thieves, and some people claim we constitute a 3-man chain of cahoots, but that's never been proven in a court of law. The next 5 days were a blur of motion and speed. Don and Bill took us through the basics of setting up a vehicle for high-performance action, and then walked us through handling dynamics. We learned to feel where the weight was loaded on a car, front, rear, and sides, and how that affects braking and control. We learned how to hit the apex of a curve, use a roadway or single lane to best advantage, and how to bring a car to a controlled stop in less than a third of the normal distance. Next came controlled slides and reversing movements, sliding 90-degree turns left and right, the forward 180-degree turn, and the reverse 180. Then we put it all together and chased one another around a track that had been marked around the airfield with traffic cones. We had a good turn of luck when it rained that afternoon, and we were able to practice our newfound skills on a wet surface. The next day, we brought out several junkers from the property disposal yard and practiced using a car as a weapon. Interesting little tricks, such as how to spin out another vehicle, how to hit a car and bring it to an immediate halt without harming yourself, and how to punch through a roadblock. Most of it was a lot of fun, but as always, it was a highly competitive atmosphere. Nobody wanted to be the one who inevitably slid out of control and out of action. The only thing that gave me a rough time was when Bill had me ride with him and operate a video camera while he chased Donnie around the track. By the time we were into the second circuit, I was howling at Bill to stop the car. "What's the matter?" he yelled over the noise of screaming tires. "I'm seasick," I yelled back. "Let me out before I puke." Bill pulled over to the side of the track and stopped. I climbed out, dry heaving, and wobbled around on shaky legs until I found my equilibrium again. Bill thought it was a riot until I drove the car and he tried his hand at watching a sliding, turning, braking, bouncing, accelerating world through a viewfinder. When I pulled over to let him get his color back, it was no longer such a great joke. The last day and a half we spent on formation driving, how to operate within a multi-car convoy and use the vehicles as a weapon to protect the limo. This was the heart of what we were learning: lead vehicle, limo, follow car, and how to maneuver those three vehicles as one. We broke at lunch on Friday and got ready to depart. Before we left, Donnie gave those of us who had been detailed to turn in the cars enough money to buy new tires for our rental vehicle. "Scatter out to different tire stores in Fayetteville," he said, "and make sure you bring me back a receipt. I got to account for that money." He doled out $20 bills from a wad as big as his fist. I had a little trouble with the man who put the tires on my vehicle. As soon as he realized it was a rental car, he became indignant that I was buying tires for it. "I wouldn't pay for them tires if I was you, mister. Hell, the rental agency never should have let that car go out with them. Tires in that condition. It's dangerous. You could have been hurt." He shook his head in disgust as he looked at the bald tires with their steel belts shining through here and there. "Shit, I'll call 'em myself," he huffed, moving heavily to the phone. "They'll have to listen to me. I'm a tar professional." "No, man, that's okay. Don't worry about it." I stayed his hand on the telephone. "I'll just have them call you if they have any problems with it. Just don't worry about it." "Well, all right, mister. If that's what you want." He squinted at the wad of bills I had stuffed into his hand like it was hush money. "But it ain't right, and I wouldn't put up with it myself." He reluctantly gave me the receipt. A concerned citizen, I thought, as I drove back to the airport to turn in the car. Turns out I wasn't the only one to have that sort of reaction from a tar professional. From then on, at the end of every driving session, we replaced the tires ourselves at our own motor pool. There are two principal methods of providing executive protection: the Secret Service way and everyone else's. The difference is asset-driven. The Secret Service pulls out all the stops. In fact, they act as much like the Gestapo as any agency in the United States government. When protecting a traveling president, vice president, their families, or presidential candidates, the Secret Service calls upon and gets the assistance of every police force and governmental agency within the jurisdictions through which the official party travels. The men and women of the Secret Service do a hell of a job, one I do not envy, of protecting the biggest lightning rod for hostile intentions on the face of the earth. But without the tremendous assistance of those other host forces, the Secret Service could never provide the level of protection it gives to those in its charge. The Secret Service is the best-dressed and most well-groomed group of people you have ever seen. This is an old joke, but it has some validity. If you don't know which person in a crowd is the American president, just pick out the seedy-looking man in the middle of a cluster of great-looking folks. The members of the presidential and vice presidential details are beautiful. There's just no other way to describe them. From these beautiful people, we had our first lessons in what would become for Delta a very important tasking. Two senior Secret Service agents, Tommy and Francis, came from Washington to spend a few days with us and guide us through the classroom sessions of protection. The single most important thing we learned from these men was the relationship you must maintain with your protectee, who is called the principal. The first thing the director of the Secret Service tells a newly elected president, Tommy said, is this: that a whole lot of people voted against him, a whole lot of people hate him, a fair number of people wish him no good at all, and a substantial number of people would kill him if they could. Tommy said it's important to let the president know that regardless of the feeling of joy and light he gets from adoring crowds of well-wishers, and despite the genuine concern the vast majority of the nation has for its president, the feeling is not universal. Then we were given a history lesson on the attempts that had been made upon the lives of presidents and presidential candidates during the 1970s. Nixon had been the target of several credible threats, but Gerald Ford attracted dangerous kooks like a magnet attracts iron filings. George Wallace had been shot and paralyzed, and one of his Secret Service agents was shot through the throat during the same attack. Next, we learned the Secret Service theory, or more accurately, their practice, of providing security. Simply put, it consists of multiple concentric circles of protection placed around the principal. The outer circles perform the missions of detection and deflection of potential problems, while the innermost circle covers and evacuates the principal in the event of an attack. If you remember the footage of the shooting of President Ronald Reagan, you've seen the textbook example of what happens in that situation. At the sound of the gun going off, the agents around the president dove on him, shielded him with their bodies, shoved him into the limo, and evacuated him from the area. They were operating on trained instinct: cover him up and get him away from danger. On the street, the agent nearest the assailant at the sound of the shot yelled, "Gun," and grabbed both the pistol and the hand that was holding it. His focus was on taking control of the weapon away from the attacker. The other agents, police officers, and citizens present piled on and crushed the shooter to the ground. Most security work consists of making your principal just a little more difficult to take on than someone else, in hopes of encouraging the malintentioned to take their business elsewhere. The problem the Secret Service faces is there is only one President of the United States, and someone intent on bagging a president, for reasons political or mental, usually won't settle for anyone else. I worked with the Secret Service on only one occasion, as the counterattack team leader for Vice President Bush's detail when he visited Fort Bragg. That wasn't a particularly onerous task, since he was on probably some of the most secure ground in the United States. But in 1994, in my post-military life, I took President Bertrand Aristide back into Haiti as a security detail leader for his protective staff. And I can tell you that it's a heavy responsibility knowing that the man you're looking after is specifically marked for death. Fortunately for President Aristide and myself, being marked for death was a fairly common occurrence in Haiti at the time. We bid Tommy and Francis a warm goodbye, full of the sincere thanks and affection we felt for those tremendous men and the service they represented. The next day, we welcomed a pair of trainers from an agency we were to have a long and close relationship with, the U.S. Department of State. This is when we learned how the rest of the world has to go about protecting a principal, with limited assets, poor to useless local support, and spotty intelligence. In those days, the State Department's security service was called State Department Security. It now goes by the somewhat more lofty title of Department of State Diplomatic Security. Then, as now, it was charged with the protection of ambassadors posted overseas, the security of American embassies around the world, and providing security services for certain visiting diplomats in the U.S. Back in 1979, State was having a difficult time. It had a very limited number of agents, and most of those wanted to be more diplomat than protection agent. Up until then, life in an embassy posting overseas had been pretty benign, but that was changing rapidly. The American ambassador to Greece had been assassinated, American embassies in several countries had been attacked, and there were credible death threats on our ambassadors in such garden spots as Beirut, El Salvador, and a few other places where locals took exception to the American worldview. For a lot of reasons, the State Department was having trouble coping with the threat it was facing. That's when Charlie Beckwith stepped in and offered them a deal they couldn't refuse. Ambassadorial protection agents did not have the massive resources the Secret Service could call upon. In the really bad places, they had only themselves and a handful of locally recruited and often minimally trained bodyguards. In the event of an attack, the protective force would not only have to cover and evacuate, but also have to fight their way out. Charlie told the State Department he would provide them with some men for posting to their most threatened embassies, men who could not only fight, but train and lead local bodyguards, something we were good at and State didn't like doing. All State had to do was provide initial training in their methods. After that, we would train our own people. And to prevent any embarrassment brought about by the idea that State had to bring in hired guns, our men would operate under Department of State cover while on assignment. It was a great deal for the State Department, and they jumped at it before Colonel Beckwith could change his mind. It gave us a permanent position in some really bad places in the world, places where we would probably have to operate in the near future. It gave us contacts and opened channels in an agency that had a very real and strong impact on our potential operations, and allowed us to start building trust with them. We would also be positioned to build personal contacts within the host nation, in the local government, as well as with other factions and peoples. It would pay off for us time after time in the years to come. Our two new guests, Alton and Raymond, painted a pretty bleak picture as they briefed us on what we were faced with around the world, and we couldn't have been more pleased. Then we dove into the subject at hand, how to protect an ambassador of the United States of America in a place where so many people were determined to kill him. Avoiding situations and places that can become problems is the name of the game. If you are doing your job well, the boss will argue with you now and again about being overly cautious, but that's okay. It's a hell of a lot better than sitting in front of a congressional panel explaining how you managed to let the representative of the American people in a foreign country be killed while he or she was entrusted to your care. To this day, no member of Delta Force has ever had to answer that question. Now it was time to practice what we thought we knew. For a few days, Alton and Raymond took turns, with one of them being the principal and the other one the detail leader, as we rehearsed our skills around Fayetteville and Raleigh. Then we started rotating in as detail leader, while one of the instructors provided a running critique and threw problems at us. Something as simple as a flat tire on the limo en route to an appointment in another city could throw a whole day out of kilter. As we became proficient at handling the smaller, more mundane problems, our teachers would hit us with the big ones. The principal is at a dinner party in a private residence when the house is hit by rockets and catches fire, and there is small arms fire in the street outside. An irate local national tries to assault the principal at a press conference in a hotel lobby. A local police checkpoint tries to stop the principal's motorcade at gunpoint. The principal's wife wants you to send the detail's local bodyguards to pick up her friends for an official tea party she's hosting at the embassy. She thinks it would be a nice touch. The principal suffers a heart attack at a diplomatic dinner. Each one of these situations happened in situ and without notice, and it taught us a tremendous lesson. Always expect something bad to happen and be ready to act. I was the detail leader when the principal had his heart attack at the dinner party. I can promise you, it's pretty disconcerting to look calmly around the room and then back at your protectee just in time to see him drop face first into his soup as the room erupts into turmoil. One of the most trying aspects of the job is that it's difficult to take care of the physical needs of yourself and your staff. Just getting a chance to go to the bathroom can be a challenge, and something as simple as getting everyone fed at meal times takes ingenuity and choreography. If the old man takes 30 minutes for a meal, that means you can only feed a few of your people during that time, and you have to make arrangements for the others before and after normal meal times. It is the rare protectee who even realizes, much less cares about, something as simple as making sure the people protecting his life have time to eat. The work is mentally demanding, not because of an intellectual challenge, but because it requires unrelenting vigilance and attention to detail. You are never able to relax, and that translates into physical fatigue, making it imperative that you maintain some sort of physical conditioning program. And that, too, has to be worked in around the principal's daily schedule, because, like the basic training drill sergeant, you get him up in the morning, you put him to bed at night, you're with him their every waking hour, and some nights while they sleep. Once our instructors were happy with our local performance, we took our show on the road to Washington, D.C. It felt much more comfortable doing that sort of thing in Washington than it ever did in Fayetteville. A 3-car motorcade in D.C. is part of the natural scenery, but back in North Carolina, it was like the circus band coming down Main Street. In Washington, the presence of a full-blown protective detail was so common that few people paid us any attention, and we were able to concentrate on our work. Besides, Washington wasn't just a world capital, it was the world capital. So, if we could do a professional job here, under the scrutiny of the best protective agencies on the planet, we should have no problems operating anywhere in the world.
And that was the next part of Preparing the Force from Inside Delta Force by Eric Haney, Command Sergeant Major, retired. Back in a minute. Thank you. So as far as Israel is concerned, one of the things that I want to get clear is that so much of politics and is just propaganda. It's a popularity contest. I was yelling at the radio a little while ago about facts and propaganda. Facts are fine, but propaganda is power. Anyway, so and the reason I was thinking about this is I was watching an account on Instagram. It was an Israeli account, and the IDF was going through a Gaza hospital, and they were showing where behind an MRI machine there was weapons that were stashed. And I knew that I know that the Hamas people are going to say that it was planted by the IDF. And you know what? Even if they did plant it, which I don't believe, so what? I don't care. I'm on Israel's side. That's all there is to it. I'm on Israel's side, and if it will bring the close of the war sooner rather than later for Israel to use propaganda techniques such as staging military weapons behind a hospital, so much the better as far as I'm concerned. Back in a minute. Thank you. A little bit of Varney and Company.
Promises on fentanyl, promises on climate, agreement to reestablish military communication.
So, promises on fentanyl, promises on climate. Why is it that I feel as though that I'm being snowed here, that I'm being BS'd, that these promises aren't worth anything? Right off the top of my head, that's what I'm thinking. That's the way I feel, that these promises aren't worth the paper they're written on, assuming that they've actually been written down. Why? Simple. China has not been punished. Communist China has not been punished. The Communist Chinese are helping to poison Americans with the sale of either, if not fentanyl directly, then its constituent parts that other people put together into fentanyl. There's every reason to believe the Communist Chinese know that this is happening, and every reason to believe that they don't care. The same thing with climate change, that the Communist Chinese have not been doing their fair share in terms of lowering CO2 emissions, et cetera, and they haven't been punished for it. The Biden administration has not punished the Communist Chinese for either one of these transgressions. If they had punished the Chinese, and the Chinese then come to us and say, hey, stop punishing us, we promise to do better, that's a promise that I can believe in. But in this particular situation, without the punishment, I'm just assuming that Xi Jinping is simply lying to President Biden. Sure, he's saying, we'll go ahead and do better on CO2 emissions. Sure, we'll make sure that there's no fentanyl going into the United States. Yeah, well, I think those are promises I'm not going to bother to believe in. Back in a minute. Thank you. A little bit more Varney and Company.
Are trans women allowed in beauty pageants, generally speaking?
They are. The question is, should they be allowed? And my answer is they should not. Absolutely not.
Why?
Because if you want to empower women...
Okay, so I'm not even going to listen to the answer to that because what he's doing is asking a stupid question. This is a stupid question because the question answers itself. What she should have said was, you don't know? When are you going to figure it out? We used to call each other, back in the day when I was growing up, we'd call each other on stupid questions. If you asked a stupid question, I'd say, that's a stupid question. I'm not going to answer it. If I asked a stupid question, you could do the same thing. But little by little, the comrades in our country have gotten rid of the stupid question, have shamed people who say that a question is stupid, and so nobody calls it out anymore. But what Stuart Varney just did was ask a stupid question, and he or anybody that asks a stupid question must be called out on it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
When foreign leaders meet an American president, they are summing him up, trying to figure out what he's made of. Right now, Xi Jinping is figuring out President Biden. He is judging his rival. They met in San Francisco. Xi saw a president who is physically frail. He walked very slowly. It was almost a shuffle. He was not robust, and his speaking voice was faint. Xi would surely have seen a decline compared to when they met just a year ago. Watch this.
I am embarrassed. I think it's CBS, but I can't remember who is CBS. I'm sorry.
Mr. President, good day.
Sorry. I apologize. What do you got? Washington Post. I think that's right.
Mr.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, I couldn't see in the light.
Is there any deal underway to free hostages? Thank you.
Yes, no, working backwards.
Remember, we voted for this guy.
I have been deeply involved in moving on the hostage negotiation. I think the pause, and that the Israelis have agreed to, is down to, well, I'm getting too much detail. I know, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to stop.
I'm sorry to see it. He seems confused. He turns 81 next Monday and shows clearly the difficulties of aging. Forgive me for being blunt, but does anyone believe that he can be president for another 5 years? That's strange credulity, doesn't it? And Xi sees this. This will affect China's judgment on invading Taiwan. And then, when you throw in Vice President Harris, Xi sees a challenged president and an incompetent vice president waiting to take over. For Biden, the optics of the meeting were not good. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
And so, like I said, this is the guy we voted for. This is more than just the United States of America or U.S. versus Communist China. This is about democracy versus authoritarianism. Who comes off better in this exchange? The authoritarian, of course. The authoritarian looks in charge. Everything is safe and secure with Xi Jinping, and with Biden, it's a mess. The United States is in chaos. And again, this is the Democrat Party in action. Democrat Party is doing this deliberately. They're not only anti-American, they're anti-Democrat or anti-democratic. Better way to put it. Back in a minute. Thank you. Another thing about the meeting between Xi Jinping and President Biden is that this is not just a meeting between two leaders or between the United States and Communist China. It is a meeting between democracy and authoritarianism. And when Xi Jinping comes to this country, let's just say he comes to this country and he meets President Biden, who is ill, looks ill, acts ill, and he realizes that this is the man that the United States of America, the voters of the United States, not just a few, but 75 million Americans voted for. He walks away feeling pretty smug. He walks away feeling vindicated that authoritarianism is the way to go. And the communist Chinese everybody in the Communist Party in China is going to be feeling the same way. Very, very smug about this. So the election coming up in 2024 is bigger than just who is going to be president of the United States. It is about whether or not we are going to continue to shame democracy by putting Biden in for a second term, or whether or not we are going to redeem ourselves and show the world that democracy works by putting in a president and the one that deserves it is Donald Trump. So we can just say by putting in or re-electing, if you will, former President Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Maria Bartiromo interviewing Steve Scalise.
One at a time or a few at a time as opposed to big, large packages. That's the biggest change in Washington. It's been needed to happen for a long time. That's what happened earlier this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you don't have the kind of pushback from certain members about a continuing resolution, but, they were pressuring Kevin McCarthy not to do anything like this. And yet we're waiting until February to change the to change the spending of Nancy Pelosi and company.
Yeah.
So there you go. What she's doing here is offering you control of the conversation because she made a statement. And then she pauses because she's expecting you to make a statement based on her statement. She wants to get your reaction. That's what they call it. Get your reaction. Now, if it was me, if I'm Steve Scalise and she pulls that stunt on me, I'm going to take control of the conversation. And I'm going to do that by asking her a question. I'm sorry, was that a question or was that a statement? And so always remember, listen carefully. And if somebody offers you control of the conversation, take it. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful. And remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.